Welcome to the Inside Scoop, your one-stop shop for cracking the leadership code. Have you ever wondered what those conversations are like in the boardroom? Curious about the secret sauce successful executives possess? On the Inside Scoop podcast, we sit down with successful executives, getting their unique perspective on what it takes to be a good leader. They'll share their hard-won wisdom, the crucial competencies needed to thrive as a leader, and the unexpected lessons learned along the way. Here, we unlock the secrets of the executive suite. We get the inside track directly from the leaders themselves. In each episode, we'll dissect the essential skills needed to go from manager to leader, offering a leader's perspective on the challenges, triumphs, and unexpected wisdom they've acquired. The Inside Scoop, leadership lessons, served fresh.
Welcome to another episode of the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Eduardo Bryant. Today, we've put together a show with a founder. You're going to like this because the area that we're going to talk about is all in that hiring for emerging organizations. It gets missed, sometimes lost in the woodwork, but we're going to tease that out today. This podcast, it's available wherever you get your podcast. And if you hear something that you can resonate and it sticks to you, we ask that you go ahead and subscribe and become part of our viewing audience. Well, without any further ado, I'd like to bring in our guest today. His name is Nick Binge, and he is the founder of Medfluencers. And I think you're going to love hearing his story. He's done a lot of things, and now he's ventured off into something that's quite different. So without any further ado, Nick, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. How about yourself, Eduardo? And thank you for having me. Pleasure to see you this afternoon.
Oh, man, the pleasure is all mine. It is great to have you. This podcast is designed for people just like you because we want to hear your story. We want to know what's going on. And then from a management standpoint, you're at that level where everything you do can effectuate your company. So we want to get into that. But before we do any of that, I'd like to know, what is it that Nick is reading that's keeping himself up to date and sharp and on top of his skills? So what are you reading right now?
Yep. So I'm reading two different books from the business side. So the first and foremost is Marketing 5.0 by Kotler. And it speaks about, it's a Harvard business book. I believe he's a professor at Northwestern. And it speaks about marketing in not only from the traditional to digital, but now this marketing for using technology to help humanity. And so it's tactical, strategic, and I think very germane to our world right now as we go through the digital revolution that I think all of us realize it now. We don't necessarily understand it, but we realize our habits, et cetera, have all been changed by us having 5G and even microprocessors walking around in our pocket. The second book I'm reading, this one is, you can only read a few pages of it at a time to digest it and to really understand it, or at least that's me. So I shouldn't speak for other people's intelligence level, but a born sales guy and not a rocket scientist. The second book I'm reading is by Porter, and it's called Competitive Strategy. And it's an oldie, but a goodie. And the principles that are in that book, I think, are still very relevant today, not only for massive corporation X, but for emerging or startup institutions like Medfluence. And I said institutions, that's probably not accurate. Let's say startup companies like Medfluence.
Good. All right. That sounds like two good ones, though.
Yes, they're detailed reads. They're not quick, but if I were to, relative to what I do, they're very germane. Another book, and you didn't ask the question, but I will extend the answer. The book that most influenced me as an entrepreneur, and I read it by accident, and I'm very anti-Nike for other political reasons, but the book Shoe Dog, I thought is a phenomenal book. And I still remember I had read it. We did like a book of the month club back when I was at Stryker and Intellis, and I read it, and a few of us read it like, this is such a phenomenal book. The story of Phil Knight and the risk and the drama that he took and putting himself out there, etc., and the highs and the lows. It's just a phenomenal story. And then when I was starting my business, I've been in corporate America for 20 years, and I had a wife that didn't work outside the home. I had 2 kids in a Catholic school education. And we had no income coming in besides some rental income. And I'm taking this flyer, a calculated flyer with that, but I'm taking a flyer. And we had to drive back to Ohio because it was COVID and my wife wanted to see her parents. They didn't want us to fly. So we drove back and we listened to Shoe Dog. And the first hour, my wife can't stand business books. Like we really want like Real Housewives or something along that genre. And the first hour, she's like, why are you making us listen to this? And then like the next 22 hours of that drive, my wife did not want to get out of the car, even when we were done, because she wanted to hear more Shoe Dog. And her parents, when they were driving down from Ohio to Florida, said, God, you got to listen to Shoe Dog. And so now whenever we do a road trip about every 18 months, and we go up to the mountains a lot, etc., I try to have Shoe Dog come through because it's just a reminder of the highs and the lows and the story of, Nike didn't start overnight. And again, not a fan of Nike. There's for different reasons, but for anyone that is thinking about doing the entrepreneurial journey, that book both has practical advice, but man, it really tells a story and really grips you. And even for my wife that had zero interest in it, it helped her buy into the journey that I was going to take.
I think Shoe Dog is a great book. And I think the story of Nike, as well as lots of companies, is also a great read. And I think for anyone who dares to be an entrepreneur, to start their own business, to do anything in that space, let me tell you, there's going to be some highs and some lows, a lot of ups and downs, and it happens. And what you start out thinking that you're going to do may ultimately change, may ultimately not do that for whatever reason. So certainly, I think that's a good book and it's certainly a good read. And we look at that. One of the stories that I have told several times is the, BMW,
Yeah.
Bavarian Motor Works. They did not start out making automobiles. For those who don't know, they were a propeller
Yes, that's right.
They made propellers for airplanes. That's why the symbol for BMW, as you look at it, it looks checkered as it goes around. It symbols a propeller that is spinning. That's why it's that. And now they make cars. So sometimes you start in one journey, but you ultimately end up somewhere else. So I think that that's great. And
there's a book by Clayton Christensen called How Will You Measure Your Life? And in it, he speaks about he speaks about Honda. And when Honda came to the United States, about their vision to be, I can't remember if it was small motors or motorcycle. And then they saw this other opportunity that was like 3 years down the road, right? And they said, all right, is now the time to pivot to this opportunity. And it was a different Honda than we think about in the United States. And it's pretty common advice amongst entrepreneurs to make sure that you save enough money because the first idea is not going to work out as you anticipate. So take those lessons, learning, don't overinvest, don't over correct in the infrastructure, etc. So then once you get the idea, you have the money and you can go ahead and run with it.
That kind of reminds me of, if you have a plan for whatever, you need to have a backup plan.
Yep.
The plan is most likely not going to work out the way you've got it. So you're going to need a backup plan to that.
Yep.
I think that's good. And, for people who want to start their own business, because a lot of people have, and a lot of people have not, but it's ideas that people have and they really want to start it. And they're saying to themselves, how do I do this? I got to start a business. I want to start it. It's in my heart. A lot of people don't want to work for corporate anymore. Some people just want to do their own thing. Some people have a passion. I don't know if you saw, but I've been watching the Many Lives of Martha Stewart.
Oh, on HBO?
It's on, yeah, well, I think it's in a lot of places.
Okay.
But yes, HBO is one of the places where it is being shown. At least I think it's fascinating of how this lady started from literally the ground level and just has grown this empire, even when she had a little bit of trouble, ended up in a situation, and she has come back. So that's the whole rebound part of it. So for people that want to do their own thing, I think these stories are great, which look at you. You've got your own thing going. I mean, you're the founder of a company, Medfluencers, and look at what's happening. So how did you get there? I'm sure it was not a linear path. You probably had a few curves, bends, maybe fell off the cliff a couple of times, got back up. Share with us. How did Nick get to where you are?
definitely a nonlinear path. So we'll even take it back to when I was in high school,
Mhm.
or even grade school. Like I will, I had a lemonade stand, or I didn't have a paper route. My dad wouldn't let me. He didn't. I think he knew that responsibility was going to fall on him. But by the time we got to high school, my junior year, an opportunity came up for me to go play soccer in Germany and Denmark, and I really wanted to do it. My parents had exposed my sister and I to the world in some capacity. My mother was an international flight attendant, so we were always kind of going somewhere. My dad's like, "Why are you going to pay this money to go play soccer? We've taken you everywhere, but I can see that it's something you want to do. You need to come up with half the money." In doing that, and I only had a few months. In doing that, my father was either trying to push me into selling drugs. It's a joke for the audience, or because I wasn't going to make that working at McDonald's or even a paper route. I had to figure out how to come up with this amount. Like it changes whenever I tell the story, but let's just say it was $1,800. I had to figure out how to come up with $1,800 in just a few short months. And said, well, you know what? I can do maybe work at McDonald's with everything else I'm doing, but I'm not going to get there and beg and borrow from my parents to see if they'll let me, or I can find another way to make money. And so I ended up making t-shirts. Had a friend, a fellow soccer player, made a t-shirt, and it was an actual guy doing a bicycle kick in a disco costume because it was just relative to where we were in life. And it said our high school, and it said jive talking, and it had soccer. This guy doing a bicycle kick on it. And I figured I had to sell 100 of those shirts. And if I made $16, I think, in profit, I could then augment what I had in savings to pay for that trip. And so I had a guy design the shirt. I then called people out of the old yellow pages, called them up, and went and I borrowed the money from my parents to put down to buy the shirts. Within 2 weeks, I had the shirts back, and then went and sold them at our high school where soccer was a very popular sport at the time, and was able to, one, meet what the consumers wanted with this t-shirt because they liked it and it showed a sense of high school pride. And then conversely, get my trip to Europe. And I was like, son of a gun, like this is much more fruitful than having to go to work at McDonald's. That was then compounded with, I was a goalie in soccer, and you would think I'm a big soccer fan. I am not, so don't ask me any questions on that. I have 2 blown out knees and a lot of extra weight, so it's not no one's going to mistake me for a soccer player at this point. But I was a goalie, and that's a highly specialized position. Around that same time, I was able to teach soccer lessons to kids that wanted to be goalkeepers and charge a fair but a good market rate. That again was, I think it was 25, $30 an hour. That was, 5 to 6 times what I was going to make at McDonald's. And I was like, man, this working for yourself thing really, really works well. And that bled into college with a few different ventures, hosting birthday parties, etc. And I was like, I know at some point I'm going to find a way to make money for myself and my family, while conversely meeting the unmet needs that are out there in the community. So I then graduated school. I went to Miami of Ohio, go Skins, go Redhawks in Oxford, Ohio. I was fortunate enough to be offered an opportunity in the manufacturing engineering space. Challenge, Eduardo, is I can't even screw in a light bulb, let alone run a plant. So there was a ton of opportunities from a leadership end for me that were there during those 2 years, because you were trying to get 100 people in a blue collar welding environment to line up behind a mission. But I also knew I couldn't stand anything that was really engineering, and I had to sit down and look at blueprints and figure that out. It just wasn't my jam. So I learned a lot from a lesson there, from just hiring and making sure that we had the right people on board, and how much that could change your productivity. And that always really stuck with me and resonated. But I also learned about myself, about how important it is for you to find a career that isn't just financially meaningful, or doesn't meet. I had a big position as a 22-year-old kid. I was a general manager of a plant, and I made my parents come out and see it because I was like, you guys got to see this thing. Like, I can't believe I'm doing this. You're not going to believe I'm doing this, but I know this. I'm not going to be doing this in a year and a half because it's just not the right fit for what I wanted. But I also had to give up some significance there because I had achieved a big title at a young age. But I had to self-reflect and go, man, you only go around once, and this is just not the right fit. So always very grateful for those lessons. The company was Lippert Components, and I still follow Jason Lippert. He was the founder and taught us, if you are not the founder, he was the CEO at the time. And that thing's gone on to bigger and better things that I could probably speak for 2 hours on this podcast about it. But if you've ever read the book Atlas Shrugged, since you have an audience, readers or leaders or readers, Atlas Shrugged, that was John Galt, excuse me, to the T. Jason was the hardest worker, probably the most impactful leader I've seen. Wasn't the right fit for me, but man, I took a ton of lessons. So from there, I went into the world of pharmaceutical sales, hooked up with a company called TAP. I loved it. Probably, again, wasn't the right fit, but I was so appreciative of the company and the opportunity, and ended up with Prevacid, which was supposed to be a $50 million drug that turned into a $4 billion drug. So it was a very good time for development. They had a lot of money around. And I said, man, I really like the blend of the entrepreneurial spirit, but also the corporate feel of how do I massage this? How do I navigate this within TAP? But I said, I really want to be in the operating room. I really want to be selling something more tangible than the idea of the prescription. I wanted to be selling a product. And I went on a cattle call. I got a call from a recruitment agency that specialized in hiring college athletes because they saw a lot of intangibles that were there. They thought I was a better athlete than I was in college. I was okay. I was a goalie. I still own some records. Great news as a goalie, you can still own records for shots saved or, shots blocked, shutouts, etc. But you can also own records for most goals let in, etc. So I'll let the audience figure that out. But I went to work for a company called Advanced Bionics, and Advanced Bionics they had what was at the time a revolutionary mousetrap in the neuromodulation game, which for the audience to speak in layman terms would be like pacemaking technology that is applicable to the brain, spine, urology. If you want to even make it more mainstream, think of what Elon Musk is doing now and him trying to enter into the medical device arena. This was very early in that, and we went to work for a billionaire named Al Mann that we launched a product into the space. And it was really my first taste of corporate meets emerging technology and entrepreneur. And I couldn't sell. I wasn't great at it. I had a lot of personality, thought that was the key to sales. And I learned, and Eduardo, this might be more up your alley, I really learned the art of sales. And I was very humbled coming in. I was much earlier in my career from a sales perspective than the other people. The other people were older and had spent time at Medtronic or these companies and had jobs selling neuromodulation. And it was pretty evident that the first week I was like, man, I don't know if I'm going to make it. And I know they said, man, I don't think he's going to make it. And I sat and I said, what do I have to do? But what they didn't anticipate is that while you might not have the skill, the will overcome the skill and you can grow that skill. And I worked at it more diligently than anyone else. And I didn't get the A territory in Chicago. I got the C or the D territory as those things go. But you know what turned out to be the best territory in the Midwest? That little C or D territory. And from that, I had showed a propensity that, from college or high school, not only the entrepreneur, but the leadership aspect, that I did a good job hiring our support reps, our sales associate reps. And my thinking was, I'm going to invest a lot of time to make sure that I'm doing the right thing when I hire, because my success, selfishly, depends on how well I do hiring here. And so I probably over-indexed on that role a little bit, but all of a sudden I have built this team of people that were not only doing well and helping me, but were growing on to better and bigger things within that division of Advanced Bionics, Boston Scientific. And they tapped me at a very young age to become a sales leader at Boston Scientific. So I picked up and moved and decided I would buy a house, move, get married, and take a promotion all within like a 6-month period. And so that was a level of, relative to first world stress, but first world stress for me taking that on. But I took those principles from hiring and went into Boston Scientific. And I'm actually proud to say, if they're listening to this, a shout out to Matt Glass and Grant Mudd. They were my first 2 hires at Boston Scientific. And Eduardo, to this day, Grant Mudd is the AVP of the West for that neuromodulation division. And Matt Glass, and I hired both of them at the same time. Matt Glass is a regional manager for deep brain stimulation. So, and both of them had relatively unconventional backgrounds. So part of my takeaway there from hiring and emerging, because we were still emerging there, was hire on will, not necessarily on skill. You can develop the skill. You have to look to make sure some of those core tenets are there, but you can't develop someone's will. And so I really looked at Grant and Matt's background. And while both of them are uber intelligent, they didn't necessarily have the skill set that, well, Grant did a little bit, that lined up with what we were looking to hire on, but they had stories, Eduardo, and they had overcome something. And whether it was personal or professional, what they were comfortable sharing, that I was able to latch on and go, man, I'm not worried that they're going to figure this out. They're resourceful, and whatever that story was. So that really fed into saying, man, with these emerging companies, what do I need to do from a hiring perspective? So I was at Boston Scientific, did very well there as a manager. Decided though that from family perspectives, etc., I was going to go back into a rep role, and probably misunderstood myself a little bit there too. And that's part of growing and learning. And went to work for a company called Dexcom, DEXCOM, and was a sales rep there. Don't look up the stock price there. It was 79 cents when I started. It was 11 when I left. I thought I was a genius. And I left because I really just wanted to get back in the operating room. That stock price, I think, has gone as high as 450, 500. So if it was just financial, I really missed the boat. But it was, again, when you speak about that wasn't the right fit, that was within the type 1 diabetes community at the time. A lot of people were living with diabetes that were in that. I wasn't, so I was sales, but I always felt moderately disconnected there. I didn't wish I had diabetes by any means. It's a horrible disease. And kudos to Dexcom and other companies that are continuing to advance and move that technology forward. But I felt like you really needed to be living with it or have someone living with it to be so connected to the mission there. So about that same time, while I was like, I don't know if this is the right fit for me, the team that had launched Advanced Bionics had found a new opportunity called Intellis Medical, and said, you know what, I really want to go into real estate. I'd done some real estate deals, and I was like, these guys will pay. And again, at 30 years old, I was probably moderately misguided that I took a job for money, and I didn't take a look at the holistic factor. And then now, but maybe some intuition that I like the leadership team there, I like the product, but it was like, oh, I'm going to make a lot of money. Turns out, Eduardo, I made okay money relative to the medical device arena, but I love the leadership team that was there, and I really believed the mission we were in. And so for the audience that's listening to this, that people are earlier on in their career, maybe even earlier, older on, free advice, which you always know what that's worth, is take a look at the holistic picture. And there's numerous things to consider when you're looking at a company. I got lucky, but I didn't really know myself, and I thought I was just making a financial decision, but it was for a multitude of reasons that I went over there. That led me to sales rep, regional manager, AVP, RVP. The title kind of changed every year, but it was the same job for the last 6 or 7 years within corporate America. Was an AVP at either Intellis or Stryker Medical. And back from that, the stake that I claim, going back to those times, whether it was at Lippert or at Boston Scientific, is I identified that if people are going to succeed here, it's really that investment the first 6 to 9 months. And that investment the first 6 to 9 months is one, hiring, making sure they're the right fit, resilience, whatever the parameters are that your team's hiring on, and not necessarily making the hiring process long, but investing in the hiring process and highly prioritizing it, getting other people to have touches on that person, having defined questions that you think are most appropriate to your organization, maybe interviewing at different times of the day, having more than one touch. I'd have managers that were in such a hurry to hire, they would, all of us can have a great day and all of us can have a bad day. So have enough touches that you get to see those person on the best and the worst. for us at Intellis, our big thing is we wanted to see if people are resourceful, understand their story, that if their back was against the wall, they could have something to overcome it. And number three, similar to yourself, Eduardo, what are you reading right now? And it wasn't necessarily a question for us about a library test. We wanted to see that you had an intrinsic drive, that you were investing in yourself. So it could be if you are going to get an MBA, but something that showed that it wasn't, we'd ask the question like, what are you doing to invest in yourself? And some people say, well, I'm at CR Bard and they did this training. Like, that was the wrong answer for the environment we were trying to create. And I was like, I'd listen to it and I would go, but what are you doing in particular? What are you doing on a daily basis? We had some great answers. We had a gal we hired down in Arizona who, when we asked her that, she's like, well, hold on, let me tell you my story. She's like, I'm from Colombia. I always wanted to sell medical devices. I knew that opportunity wasn't going to afford itself in Colombia. I left my family. My family wanted me to stay. I came up to ASU. I took loans out. Then went and sold copiers for 2 years. I was the number one salesperson because all I wanted to do was get into a job like this. Now, there's a little bit of, you got to read between lines. Is this, and I'm giving you the truncated version. Is this person telling the truth, which, the story's too good to be true, but we had other checks and balances that were there and it checked out. And then I'm pretty sure when her back is against the wall and that sales number is staring down her throat, she's going to find a way to get it done, right, Eduardo? So you're hiring for that personality there. And then we would do we called it remodel. And it was our clinical study. It was a prospective multi-center randomized controlled trial. I haven't been there in 8 years, and I still know that off the top of my head. That compared FEST to in-office balloon sinus dilation. And we'd ask the people present it. We wouldn't give them much direction intentionally because that's the environment we were there. We wanted people to see if they were resourceful, if they were going to put in the time, and then when they came to the study, if they could actually present it. And we really, using that intentional process between the characteristics and what the process was going to be there, we really zoned in and I think built an amazing culture that eventually led to an acquisition by Stryker for a premium. And it was, as great as the technology was, we all know no technology has never sold itself. And it was the people that went out there and made it happen. And when you are a small cap, publicly traded company that is staring down the gun of a big number, and everyone has to contribute and all oars are in the water, we couldn't afford to have bad hires. And so that was one of the things that I think really separated the Intellis culture and permeated throughout is we spent a lot of time, not only in the hiring, but then the developing of those people to give them the skills and empower them for the first 6 months on the job. So they felt like they could believe in it. And so, back to how we initially began this conversation and me landing the plane of a very long trip. I think I just took you to Frankfurt. That's the journey of Nick Binge.
I love it. It's a great journey, man. It's a lot of good stuff in there. I'm going to dig into some of that. But before I do, that will, that desire. Now, it started back when, you had to come up with $1,800 or whatever the actual number is. But in having to do that, was that the spark? Or was the desire already in you to be an entrepreneur, even though you may not have even known the word entrepreneur or even know what that was? But would you say that it started there or maybe it had been there before and that just kicked it off?
Yeah, I think that's probably option B. Not probably, it is option B. Okay. So internally very driven, and probably unhealthily so at times, right? Like there's a balance there as I get older and balancing that out. But I always enjoyed commerce, be the joke that I made, and having not back against the wall, but wanting to achieve something and going, man, I can try this and go out on a limb and do it. I think had resided in me in other capacities. Even my dad, like I was not a great athlete, but I was moderately successful in high school and good enough in college to get a scholarship. And it wasn't because like I was naturally all that talented. It was because I just worked harder than everyone else. And I did it in a pleasant way. Like I wasn't a jerk about it, but like my dad's like, that damn kid, he's, in the garage again, jumping over sticks, to try to increase his vertical. Like he kid can barely jump, and I wore ankle weights to school every day in 7th and 8th grade. And I wore a weighted vest in 8th grade because all I wanted to do was be faster and be able to jump higher than everyone else. Was I able to? The jury's still out on that, but it was that kind of will or extra effort that then kind of laid into it. Then when I was able to saw that translate to business and the idea of commerce and something that I enjoyed, then it was kind of the same resourcefulness. What do I need to be doing to make myself better? How can I get an edge? Then that translated into the business side.
You know, let me tell you, just in listening to your story, and of course, that part right there, that's kind of reminds me of what you said a moment ago when you talked about you don't hire skill, you hire will. Well, when you think about it, you putting on ankle weights and jumping over sticks and all the things you've done and other stuff that kids have done, and me included, all that stuff. When you're in sports, wouldn't you say that the majority of people in sports want to win? Something in them says they want to win. Either it's an individual sport like tennis or it's a team sport. But nonetheless, that desire to win is there. That catapults us to where we're headed in terms of the spirit and how we do what we do. Here's something that someone taught me. You can't teach, give a hoot.
Yeah.
If they don't give a hoot, you can't teach that.
Right. Yep.
They got to either have that or they don't. And I think when you're in sports, like you're talking about, you got to give a hoot. In other words, you want your team to win. So in the locker room, at halftime, when the coach is giving that speech, you're getting fired up and pumped up thinking, we can go out there and we can win this game. Whether you're up or down at halftime, you're trying to say you can do it. But that starts with having the right people on the team, i.e., having the right talent within the company. So a couple of questions just to kind of get out there. And that is, we talk about hiring for an emerging company. Now, some companies are brand spanking new and they're emerging. Some companies been around for a while and they've just been stagnant. And now they're starting to emerge. Either way, there's an uptick. I mean, you talked about the stock going from like, I don't know, $20 down to $11 or 11 cents.
No, that was 79 cents to $11 to 450 that I was not part of. And I still remember being on vacation and it came across CNBC and I was with my parents and my dad threw a pillow at me like, what did you do?
How was his aim? Did it hit you and make you go?
Oh yeah, it hit me. It hit me.
Yeah, those kind of things. So, you know, we've talked about hiring, and I think that is that's an area I believe that is just unmet. I think corporations miss it on that. I think they miss it badly. I think that when they promote someone up to a certain level, within that job responsibility comes filling open requisitions. And so here they are, perhaps with zero training. All they've got is how they got that job, and they did their own interviewing, so they interviewed for that. But beyond that, do they know what is an assumptive question? Do they know what a leading question or how to even set one up? Do they know what is an unbiased question? I mean, these are things that people don't get. I think we focus too much on asking open-ended questions versus closed-ended questions, but that doesn't
Time
always...
and place. Yep. There's
So
a strategy there.
talk a little bit about your strategy around the whole hiring thing and how you conduct it. What do you do? What do you look for? What are some of the questions you ask? What do you think are the best practices in that space?
So a little bit of a parlay on the saying you said before about hiring and skill. I'm going to mix it up, but there's an adage that we think is applicable, and it's hire on skill, contract on will, or contract on experience. Or sorry, I screwed that up, and I saw the look on your face, so thank you. I appreciate you being expressive. Hire on will, contract on skill, meaning we can hire and develop people that have the right attitude and are the right fit for the organization. But anytime that I have hired on skill, it's a 50-50 if it works out, because their attitude, etc., and it's not just maybe not the right fit. And so we have a really good relationship with a few different contractors and what we do, whether it's developing technology, managing some of the technology, but that then we're not like they have a contractual obligation to us. We're hiring their skill. It may change if that skill is important, but we can develop the talent if they have the right attitude and some level of mental capacity. We can help develop that and actually develop a training program that's going to empower them and should just feed their appetite that they want to grow within the organization. And I literally taking that playbook right out of what we did at Intellis and Stryker. So number one, we're looking for people that are curious. Two, we're looking for people that have self-investment. Three, we're looking for people that are resourceful in finding their way. And we're not married to whether it's a college athlete, whether it's someone who was selling copiers, whether it's someone who was in marketing at a life insurance company. We're looking for those three tenets that are there. And that then is going to inform rest of our hiring decision as it cascades down. If we need a certain skill set, we need a programmer, which I don't speak code, but we work with plenty of coders. At that point, then we're looking for an established company that can be nimble enough, and we are just going to contract that work out. And that way, then we are in a position that if that doesn't work out, it's not a big deal, but we're going to invest in someone that really wants to grow and develop within the company.
I heard you earlier, you were talking about how there should be many touches. So if you're doing an interviewing, you've got candidates coming in, because you said you could have a bad day, which is true, or you could be having a great day. And if you hire somebody when you're having a bad day, typically you hire the wrong person. So when you're thinking about touches, do you have some thoughts around, should it be individual interviews? In other words, they interview with you from 9 in the morning till say 10 in the morning. And then I go down the hall, interview with John from say 10 o'clock until 11 o'clock, and then go to lunch and do those kinds of things, and then come back and maybe have 2 or 3 people after that, versus panel interviews where John, Bob, you, I are all in the room together, and we interview the candidate over, say, a good hour and a half, and then we get the chance to take turns asking questions. What are your thoughts around those two methodologies of how to interview?
I have a preference, and this is particular to me. So I think it's going to depend on what your preference is as a manager. I'm not a big fan of the panel interview, personally.
Tell us why.
When I've done them, I don't feel like it has been as realistic. And having been in an AVP role and kind of witnessing how the interview has gone, I felt like managers were spending half the time, and like there's just that human nature. Like they were trying to show me they knew how to ask questions. And then it became a little bit of a one-upsmanship, and it became less about the candidate. I want this to be about the candidate when we're hiring. So there could be an element of panel if I have the right managers, but broadly based, it isn't something that I've recommended. The only time that I have really liked it is you always want to be respectful of the candidate's time too, right? Like they're leaving their job to come interview with you. So I want to be accommodating as well, as much as we can, but we are running a business. So it's a fine line you're trying to balance there. So if a panel will get it done, okay, but I never thought it was very fair to the actual interviewee that we got their best. Instead, to me, I felt like a little bit of it became about the managers and their ability to ask questions, because they're competitive too, right? And they want to show the AVP, whoever it is, they knew how to ask questions. So I felt that it was a less than ideal environment. For the day, in what I do, I try to get different touches on different days. Again, being respectful, and we'll work within the candidate's time if it's someone that we've really identified. I think the second part about this is, and I learned this from Gallup, but we were doing it, is clearly define what the expectations are of the job up front. And you can do that in a friendly way and make sure to have the person repeat those expectations back to you in the first part of in the first interview, so that you're not wasting their time and they're not wasting your time. Nothing's worse than having a candidate invest a bunch of time and you have a misalignment. Or I shouldn't say nothing's worse than, the worst is you don't do that in any capacity. You hire the person, like, you never said I was going to have to do this in the job. And you're like, no, this is what the job is. Like, tell them the good and the bad. And no job is perfect. This isn't prom, like everyone's like hiring's prom. No, tell them the good and the bad. Because then when they get in, like, no, I told you, like, we're not great at this. We're really good at this, but there's trade-offs in every company. You picked this job because you were willing to accept that this was a trade-off. It doesn't mean you're lowering your bar, but you just understand the expectations of the job and what's the good and what's the bad. And I thought we always did a good job of that up front, so that by the time the candidate got to the final interview, it was very well known what they were going to do. So, for example, and like this is 2024 now, Eduardo, so you've got to be very cognizant of the time. But in 2017, both you and I have medical device backgrounds. People were really eager to get into those jobs, right? And there was a lot more talent that was applying than the job was. We hired a sales associate. Sales associate was designed to support the territories. Unfortunately, a sales associate, we didn't have this litany of cash that we could hire all these sales associates, right? Investors wanted revenue producing heads, so we could only hire a few sales associates. But our goal was to bring someone in that was very hungry, that wanted to invest and develop them so they could get their own territory. The trade-off, though, Eduardo, was, and I called it the spaghetti dinner talk, is on Thursday night, our expectation was like, if we called you, you had to go somewhere. It wasn't like, well, I've got baseball coming up or I've got a softball game. So I'd say, look, on Thursday night, I get it. Your wife's family's coming to town, or your girlfriend's family's coming to town, and you got tickets to Cats. I don't know who has tickets to Cats, but that way it would stick. And you're going to go to the old spaghetti warehouse, and then you're going to Cats. We may call you at 4 o'clock and say, we need you in Chicago. I don't want to make that call. You probably don't want to go. But for this job that you're signing up for, it needs to be very clear. You say, yes, I'm going to Chicago. And you're going to grow and develop. And the opportunity is that we think in a year, you're going to be able to get your own territory. You'll probably have to relocate for that territory. But here are the earning expectations. And then this is the investments we can make in you. But there is a trade-off. And I need to make sure that you clearly understand that before you start this position. And that was actually a massive feeder ground for us to go from, I think, until us at the time, we went from, early days, like 20 reps in the region, to at the end, we had 120. And most of them came through that program. And a lot of our leadership did. Started there because then they had a really ground floor understanding of how the job went. And even when I worked at Lippert Components and I was general manager of the plant, Eduardo, they made us do the first 2 months?
What's that?
Weld, man. Weld. I'm a terrible welder. So you knew every aspect of the job. Now, you can't always afford to do that. But for emerging companies, I think it's also very clear too, like you're going to be far from perfect. Your infrastructure is always going to be developing. The game is going to be changed. So people have to understand that. And it's not that you're not looking out for the employee. I think you are when you put that information out front so that they understand what they're getting into. And hopefully they have some previous experiences that will help align so they have an appreciation for that. No world's perfect, but as long as you can communicate that up front, I think you're building trust that is going to build a long-term relationship with the people that you're looking to hire and bring into the organization.
Basically, what you're talking about is being honest.
That's correct. I'm Eduardo. So an underlying tenet that I try not to communicate is honesty and integrity. Even if I take a look at the business people that I have surrounded myself with, like that was one of our core tenets. But I'm always scared, and I've had it. If someone tells me how honest they are, Eduardo, what's the first thing I think?
That they're not that honest.
They're not that honest, right? Like they're overcorrecting. Yeah. So I didn't want to bring that up for that intention. But thank you for ferreting that out.
You know what? I brought it up, so it's not on you. It is on me. There's something else kind of hidden in there, and you were touching upon it. And so I'm going to tease it out, and that's this. When you're interviewing, we typically think that it's about the question we ask. We sometimes craft our own questions. Sometimes the company gives us a list of questions to say, all right, here's a bank of questions. You pick any one of these you want, and you can ask them. And it's all about questioning and questioning. Maybe you had this experience. I certainly have, where I'm doing a whole day full of interviewing. And then there's a guy or girl who's there and they choose not to ask me any questions.
Oh yeah, it's a kiss of death.
They just want to have a conversation. They want to know what's in my head. How do I think? How do I process information? Not so much trying to figure out my skill level. What companies have I worked for? What have I done? Was I number one? Did I win President's Club? Did I develop? Did I
Yep.
create? All those words that they want you to put on the resume. Words like created, ED. Words like developed, ED. All the skill stuff to show that, look, I'm qualified, I'm capable of doing this. I've had interviews where they didn't ask a single question. I mean, not a question specifically about the job. We had a conversation and we just talked, but we got into things that were, deep and organizational and, what's this like? And that's interesting you have done that. And what the interviewer was looking for was not, do I have the skills to do this? Because they
Yep.
can teach that. They were more interested in, how do you think? How do you process information? What space do you play in? What vision do you have? Do you even have a vision? What are your goals in life? What are your thoughts around maybe having interviewing that takes that course versus I've got to ask these 6 questions and they've got to be spot on and I'm looking for a certain answer that's going to tickle my ear?
I'm probably, as you can tell through this interview, I'm relatively outside the box with things. So I'm all about if you can have a really good conversation that you can pique each other's curiosity to see if someone is the right fit. And if it doesn't necessarily follow a format, or I shouldn't say a direct format, I do like a balance though, where you have at least a little bit of a governor. So people don't get too far out of the weeds as a leader. And look, exceptional people require exceptions. So you'll have some managers that they got it. They as long as they're hitting on their tenets and how they want to do it, they're great. But I think for the majority, try to provide some guidelines for the managers. So we talk about like that expectation component. That was one thing that I'd always require with the managers before they brought final candidates to me, and was that make sure they had those expectations. Those was the first thing before when I sat down with someone. There was a little bit of the connectiveness, but I wanted to make sure that their expectations for what they were interviewing for in the finals aligned with what we were doing. And, going back to this just piqued something in my mind. Just, how you spend your time, you can say all you want, but how you spend your time really informs others of where your values are. And when we talk about an emerging company, whether it's Medfluence Advisors, when I was at Intellis Medical or Stryker, like we wanted to empower the hiring manager, but we put so much value on that hire of who we were going to bring on the team that we were part of the hiring and the training process, even as at the AVP level.
Mm-hmm.
That was a non-negotiable because it was that critical. And then that informed, actions talk louder than words, that we take this seriously. You're just not going to mail in your hiring process. And I don't think my team wanted to, but complacency sometimes happens. And we wanted to show like, this is the most important thing we do these first 6 months, all hands on deck.
First 6 months, I like that. So for the
Yep.
managers out there and the AVPs and the people who are responsible for hiring, here's a good lesson for you there, is that don't hire the skill, hire a person's will.
Very much so.
Not to have some skill, obviously, we know that. But it's
Absolutely.
that will, it's that drive, because you can't teach that. If a person just doesn't, care, you can't put that in them. That's
No.
that's not going to be there. This is great. So around the whole space about interviewing, I think it's so important that we focus on what you call about the emerging, organizations and how we do what we're supposed to do, so that on the bench, we've got qualified people who can do it. So
Yep.
here's a question that I've got that just popped into my head, and that's this. Do you hire for the position that's open, or are you looking to see if the person has the will and the ability to take on the next level?
So the the book answer that I'm supposed to give is you hire for someone that's going to take on the next level. I think I would invert this question a little bit or reframe it and say, I think fit trumps. So you could be hiring for a clinical support specialist that is in Laredo, Texas, that is a hard market to hire in. And you're looking for someone that is going to build long-term, because it's very important to that business that you have a long-term person there. Conversely, the majority of times you're trying to hire that not only for this job, but the next job to help the organization grow. And the last organization I was with, Stryker, I thought that was one of the best things that they did. You weren't getting hired in for that job. You're getting hired in for your next 3 or 4 jobs and the ability to grow in the organization. And they fostered a community that did that. So I don't think there's an absolute there. I would think I would prioritize fit on relative to what you're hiring there. But the majority of times, if you were to Pareto principle it, it's going to be you're hiring for not this job, but the next job in career development.
Okay. I think that's a good answer, because there's no one thing fits all, right?
Yep.
Some companies have to do it one way, some have to do it a different way. That's good. These are some good topics. I think these are some good insight that you're providing here, Nick, on how we can do our job better, and especially if you are in leadership. So I think these are some really good areas. And, I thank you for taking the time just to be part of this. So before we sign off, I want to give you an opportunity. If there's some things that you were thinking about that you didn't say, or maybe some pearls of wisdom that you can put in now, I'm going to give you an opportunity to be able to do just that for our listening audience who've enjoyed this, certainly saying those are some good points. So if you've got some other pearls of wisdom or nuggets you want to offer, the floor is yours, Nick.
Thank you, Eduardo. I appreciate that. So the pearls of wisdom, that's probably elevating what is coming. But one thing that I forgot to mention is, it's funny, a gentleman named Matt Ganem, he's built a multi-million-dollar organization, and he worked with us at Intellis. And Matt came from the food industry initially, Potbellies. And he used to talk about when he hired in a restaurant, he would always gauge how fast someone walked with him. And I thought that was interesting, because when I worked in manufacturing, that was a guy named Fred Parsons, who was a purchasing manager, taught me the same thing. He'd always walk out to the scrap. It was scrap. I forgot what it's called. Scrap yard's not the right word, but it was essentially a gallon or a barrel of scrap. And he'd walk out with them, and he would see if they kept up with them. And he used that as part of his test to see if they had the same sense of urgency that he was looking for. Now it comes down to fit. That might not be a prime, a non-negotiable for whatever organization you're in. It happens to be the organizations I've been in, and those organizations, there had to be a sense of urgency that was there, because the majority of times they were emerging and small, and you had numbers that needed to be hit just like anywhere else, but it was mass critical to the organization and had to have that drive and passion. But that sense of urgency, it was as simple as identifying that we were going to walk with this person and make sure that they could keep up. And that always stuck with me, to the point that when we were at Intellis and Stryker, I didn't necessarily measure that. But then, like, after that became to my attention, I was like, man, Fred Parsons did that too, Matt. Guess what? I started to watch how fast people were walking with each other. And it was like, man, these are a bunch of speed walkers. Like, what is going on here? There's no one out for a lazy stroll. So I don't know if that just manifested the actual behavior from something that was intrinsic, but I always thought that was an interesting study of this test that inadvertently came out, that I saw 2 different people do in successful organizations, but had similar characteristics. And then I saw it manifest itself within, like, everyone's walking down the hallway. Like, man, people are really cooking here. So thought I would share that. I don't necessarily know if it's a pearls of wisdom as much as it's a story that could relate to you and your hiring organization, but thought I would share it.
You know what? I bet if we did a survey, Nick, and we sent it out and asked people to respond back with the types of intangible things that they do, that they look for, that become clues as to whether this person has the aptitude for this specific job or this company, I bet we would get a lot of anecdotal stories very similar to that, because that is a good one. Because if it is required that you have to walk fast, or even just showing a sense of urgency, and I think that's important, because not everybody shows a sense of urgency. It's like, oh, I'll get around to it. Oh, I will finally do it. And I think that a task like that In other tests, I bet you can tell people a lot about whether or not this person is going to be able to survive in this company. I like one of the questions I like to ask during interviews is, if I'm the interviewee, one of the questions I like is this: what type of behavior or people do not succeed here? And I bet you the word urgency will come up. And that urgency could be walking out to the scrap barrels and kind of doing that, or things. And now that you said that, I was thinking about one time when I was managing the military business. I can remember one of the guys, him and I would have to walk. We'd be on these military bases that are very spread out, and you'd have to go from one place to the other. He walked faster than I do. So I was challenged to keep up with him. And I'm wondering now, I wonder if that was the test.
Well, I think Fred Parsons actually came from the military, so the gentleman that taught me that. So maybe I've always credit people, the best people that I've seen from a hiring have different ways of assessing the one, they know what they're looking for, and then two, they have different ways of assessing it besides just asking questions on a paper. And then, there's the intangibles and the tangibles that then create this alchemy of if this person's the right fit or not.
And I think all of this is good. I think there's got to be a combination of what you call tangible as well as the intangible. In that, I think when you're trying to source out the right person to be on the bench, the person that comes into the organization, I mean, that's almost management 101, is to fill open requisitions with the absolute best person that you can. And then, of course, train them, equip them. That's your job. 24/7 is your training. You are training, you're developing, you're making better every single employee that is under your tutelage. You've got to be doing your job there. So great, man. You know what, Nick? Thank you, man. I appreciate
Thank you, Eduardo. I appreciate it. That was a great conversation.
Yeah, man. Thanks for sharing some time with us. And for the listening audience out there, we hope that this resonated with you. We hope you took some pearls of wisdom, some nuggets away that you can use in your life, not just for your job, but even you personally. So until we get a chance to come together again, we appreciate you joining us for this episode of the Inside Scoop. And until we can meet again, look for us. We are out there, and we look forward to being part of your listening day or viewing day. So for now, we're signing off for this episode. Bye for now.
For more exclusive leadership insights, be sure to subscribe to the Inside Scoop on YouTube and Spotify. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit that share button and spread the word. See you next time on the Inside Scoop.